Hello, welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Matthew Lucas.
And I'm Stephen Ryan.
And we post a video every Friday, so do hit subscribe and the notification bell if you want to know exactly when our missives pop into the ether.
And don't forget, if you've got a burning question, put it in the comments below and we'll get round to dealing with it on our Monday shorts.
We will indeed. And today, Stephen Ryan, a bucolic setting, the sun is shining, the bees are buzzing, the flies are flying.
Yes.
What are we going to do?
Well, we've come to one of my favourite spots, a friend's garden called Rosebery Hill, I should say. And it struck me that we're in high spring and there's lots of very pretty things in flowers, some unusual, some quite common. And we thought we might just engage with some of those and show them off a little bit.
Pretty things in flower. And one of the things that strikes me, so Barry and Ruth's garden it's a sheep farm. So I mean, there's a lot of land, and cultivated land, or sort of horticulturally cultivated land, it's quite a lot actually. So there's just a lot of breadth. And I was saying to Stephen, you rarely see in urban or suburban gardens things given this much space.
Yep.
Exhibit A, this basically hedge of cistus, which is kind of the length of an average suburban garden.
Yeah, and nearly as wide as the average front garden. I mean, it's just humongous how big they are.
So scale is one of the things in this garden. So rather than seeing a single specimen, there's just acres of something, and it looks striking and so different to me.
And it does strike me about cistus particularly. They're often regarded as something that's comparatively short-lived in gardens, and that can sometimes be due to poor drainage, I might add. But even if they're happy and you're trimming them back and cutting them back all the time, you're not allowing them to do their natural thing, which is to foam out as a large mounded shrub. And these ones, of course, are just mown around the edges of. So Barry and Ruth have left these to grow as big as they want, and you can't see a dead patch in them. You can't see any sort of issues with them. No. They've obviously been here for many, many years. So in fact, cistus can be a long-lasting shrub in gardens, particularly if you've got the space to let it do its thing.
And this is kind of like a wild hedge. So if you were in the right climate, I mean, it's a great hedge.
Yeah, well, it takes me back to Mediterranean islands, I have to say, and the south of France.
Where are cistus from?
Well, they're from that Mediterranean region. So I've seen them growing on Crete, I've seen them growing on Corsica, I've seen them on the south of France, in Italy. So you will see them all around. I've seen them in Morocco. So they go all the way around the sort of Mediterranean basin, basically. And so they love the same sort of conditions in which you'd grow lavenders, rosemaries, all those other sort of classical Mediterranean plants. So oodles of sun, good drainage, not necessarily the world's best soil, but as long as it's well drained, it seems to be the thing. And if you can let them go and do their thing, well, you end up with this.
Bees are loving them, I must say. And so there's a species here and a cultivar.
Yes, we've got a pale pink species here, parviflorus, which is charming. I quite like that. And that one up there, I understand, is a hybrid called Brilliant or Brilliancy. Has very big, hot pink flowers with the dark eye. It's a very in-your-face one. You can see how man's breeding changes nature's effects sometimes.
I must say, I think this species one is very beautiful. It's very subtle and a charming, charming flower, and it's covered in flowers.
Yeah, and there's masses of buds yet to come. They've obviously only been out for a few weeks so far, and there'll be many, many weeks of colour on them before they decide to give up for perhaps late summer.
Well, there are so many things in this garden for us to have a look at, but there is another cistus that we walked past that, again, just the sheer scale of it took my breath away.
Yeah, we have to go and look.
Let's go and look at that. Well, Stephen, a slight technical problem, so we're just going to have to record the audio again for this, but we're in this sea of what? Is this glorious cloud of yellow?
All right, well, this used to be known as Helimium, closely related to the cistus.
Ah, I can see that.
Yeah, well, now it's a cistus, so it's even more closely related than you thought. So the yellow cistuses were all Helimiums. They've now been included into cistus. So here we have Cistus ocymoides. It makes a fabulous carpeting plant, so it's very weed suppressant. So we've got this huge area of it, and I assume it all started as one plant at some point or another, and it's now covering meters and meters and meters. Its little yellow flowers with its brown dots are just fabulous.
Now, I think one of the things about this garden is, again, that you have the scope to allow things to become as big as they want. So this is the most extraordinary bed of yellow.
It is. It's fabulous. And I've never seen this plant in such huge areas before. So it is obviously happy where it's growing. It's got a nice Mediterranean style climate. It gets nice and dry in the summer, which a lot of these plants are used to and want. And it's staying nice and compact, because I've seen it in other gardens where it's ended up this rather straggly, miserable looking thing because it just grew too fast, left dead branches behind it, and you end up with a bit of a mess, really. So it does like that hot, dry conditions.
What about its hardiness? I mean, some cistus are grown in Britain. So what about this one?
Look, this one would probably grow all right in some of the warmer southern areas of Britain. I've certainly seen it listed in a lot of British catalogues, so it's obviously available and for sale there. So yeah, why not? But yes, you wouldn't want to take it to the damp, soggy bits.
Who would? On to the next. Now, this is something Ruth particularly wanted us to look at because it cuts very well. And in fact, I had walked past it and said, what is that? So, great minds think alike. What is it, Stephen?
All right, it's a Tanacetum ptarmicifolia, and it's a Canary Island native plant. It's an evergreen shrub, and coming from the Canaries, it comes from a very Mediterranean style climate.
Yeah.
So well drained, sunny aspect, and not dead freezing conditions seem to suit it. But it is one of those plants that you need to repropagate fairly regularly because it becomes leggy and starts to fall apart with age. So it's not a long-lived shrub, but it flowers and flowers and flowers, and its fine filigreed silvery foliage is very pretty.
It is, and the contrast of the white and the yellow flowers with the silver foliage, it's very beautiful.
It is, it's nice, and it's a genus that has a bit of a concentration of species in the Canary Islands.
Yep.
So it's probably the epicenter for them. And the Tanacetums are obviously all daisies, so they're in the Asteraceae family. Many of them are sort of soft-wooded shrubs, I suppose you'd call them, or sub-shrubs.
A sub-shrub. Well, from this sub-shrub on to the next.
Yes, let's go.
Well, just sort of nestling above us, Stephen,
Yes.
somewhat tricky to get in the shot, is
a Puya. And Barry tells me he bought it from me years ago. And over the years, I've had a few different Puyas come my way, generally as seedlings from growers and things that were surplus to their requirements. And the only ones I can think of that were blue that I've had over the years is berteroniana and velutina. And I'm not sure whether it's either of them, but it's a beautiful pale turquoise blue Puya.
It is.
And it's obviously had another flower spike earlier, which is well above my head and finished. And it's making an enormous mound of prickly foliage. Not for the timid gardener, I would suggest. So you do need to plant them with some care because they're quite spiky. And the spines tend to curl inwards, so you can get your hand in, but you can't get your hand back.
And yet the flower is so pretty.
They're beautiful. They're generally hummingbird pollinated in the wild. And they are a stunning group of pineapple relatives from South America.
Beautiful. Onwards and upwards.
Yes, let's go and have a look at some more.
Well, Stephen, one of the things you don't really think of in terms of spring flowering plants is a palm tree.
Funnily enough. And yet there's many palms out there that have quite spectacular flower heads. And this is just the common Trachycarpus fortunei, the Chinese windmill palm or fan palm. And the flower heads are just beautiful. They're spectacular. And we were just walking past and we went, oh, there's something to include in our video.
And very golden and very striking. Now, we did make a video about cool climate palms at the Melbourne Botanic
Yes,
Gardens.
we did.
And one of those was in bloom, and it was a mature specimen. It just had drapes of ivory flowers. They do look, some of them look incredible in bloom.
Oh, yes, they can be very, very spectacular indeed, and a great source for pollinators as well. And of course, Trachycarpus fortunei is one of the world's cold hardiest of palms, so you'll see it in some fairly borderline climates doing beautifully.
And I would have thought this is quite a small plant age-wise to have been flowering.
It does seem to be comparatively young, although Barry's got another one further across in the garden I noticed earlier that's smaller again and still in flower.
Well,
so there you go.
Maybe they're just happy.
Yes, well, they obviously are. Although, of course, some things flower because they're not happy.
True, their last burst of life.
Yeah, let's try and get some seed set. So some plants...
I'm dying.
Yeah, although I don't think these are. They're looking perfectly healthy, so I think they're fine.
Okay, on to the next.
Yes.
Once again, our audio has failed us, so we're just re-recording this, Stephen. Now, what is this sensational tree that grabbed my fancy?
Well, this is the North American fringe tree, Chionanthus virginicus. It's a reasonably hardy little tree. It will cope with quite a lot of cold in the winter. It will cope with fairly dry, hot Mediterranean style climate in the summer. In fact, the Chinese one I've seen growing in the garden of the Botanic Gardens in Sydney. So they will grow in quite a range of climates. You don't see it around the traps terribly much because it's not the easiest thing in the world to propagate.
Oh.
Doesn't like to be grown from cuttings much. Seed is normally the way you would go. And like some of the tree seeds that you get, they sometimes wait till the second year to even germinate. So
like our famous Davidia.
yeah, so it's a slow process to get it going, but once it does, it grows reasonably quickly. This one is still quite young and it's obviously not heavily in flower yet. I think give it another few years, because I have seen these trees as established trees with this enormous cloud of white flowers through them where you can hardly see a leaf. So this is still not looking at what it can do. It can do far more than this, even though it attracted your attention.
Well, it is incredible. So I guess it's a specimen tree. I mean, how big is it going to get in relation to large trees?
Yeah, well, it's never a large tree. And in the wild, it seems to vary from something that grows quite shrubby to something that actually grows quite trunky and becomes a fair dinkum tree. So it depends, I guess, where you get your seed from and the individual plant to an extent. But a fully grown one would probably not be much more than about 4 or 5 meters tall in general. Certainly you're not going to live long enough to get something much bigger than that.
So it's fine for sort of inner city gardens. It's not going to be a massive tree.
Perfect for a suburban sized garden. It flowers in the latish spring when a lot of the other spring nonsense is over, so it's very useful in that way.
Spring nonsense.
Yeah, well, you know what I mean. There's lots of cherry blossoms and prunuses and all sorts of things in flower in the early spring. This will do its stuff in the late spring, getting into the early summer, and its foliage in the autumn can be quite a respectable, soft, buttery yellow before it sheds.
Oh, right. So, yes, we didn't mention that it's not evergreen.
Yeah.
And I imagine a full-sized one covered in bloom is going to look amazing.
Oh, absolutely fabulous. I haven't seen a really big one of the North American one in the flesh, but I've certainly seen really old ones of the Chinese one, and from a distance it just looks like a cloud. It's just amazing.
Magnificent. Stephen, these are very beautiful.
Yes, they are Australopithecus.
Yes, a little bit weedy upon Mount Macedon.
Yeah, they can be, especially in the wild forms in orange and yellow.
Yes.
But some of the garden cultivated forms are a little bit more restrained.
I'm surprised we're talking about these, Stephen. They seem somewhat commonplace.
Well, they are quite commonplace, although albeit they're a good cut flower. But it isn't about Alstroemerias we want to talk, but about a relative thereof.
Which I think we saw in your garden this morning.
We certainly did, so let's go back and have a look at it.
Stephen, this has just caught my eye. Tell me everything.
Well, I'm not sure about knowing everything, but this is one of the South American Bomarias.
Yeah.
They're sometimes called climbing Alstroemerias, sort of appropriately because they're related, but pointlessly.
Well, the leaves look similar.
Yeah, and the flowers,
From a distance, could look similar.
Yeah, well, they are quite closely related. The main difference is that Alstroemeria has a flower that is informal in shape because the petals are different sizes and shapes, whereas Bomaria's petals are all even. So that's the main botanical difference between them.
Yeah.
And it's a genus of plants all from South America. This particular one, Bomarea salsilla, is from central Chile, but they go right up into northern South America, and there's 124 recognised species. Not all of them are climbers. Some of them are actually herbaceous perennials like the Alstroemerias are. I've got one called Dulcis that only grows to 30, 40 centimetres tall with pink flowers. And I've seen them in South America and Peru, scrambling over the forest shrubs and things. And there's a range of colours in them. Salsilla is interesting because it comes from slightly drier habitats. A lot of the Bomarias, although the stems die after flowering, have their new stems coming up at the same time. So you've always got this changeover of material. Salsilla, on the other hand, when it gets warm in the summer, just disappears. It just dies right back to its rather finger-like tubers that it has under the ground. And so it doesn't need any summer water because it just disappears. Whereas some of the others that have stems up all year round do in fact need to be irrigated for the summer.
And some of them do have really quite large flower heads.
Oh, yes.
I've got one that's almost Alstroemeria size, the flowers. They're quite trumpety.
Yep, and well, I've got one up at work which has a huge head, size of a grapefruit, and it's a brilliant deep burgundy colour when it's in flower. There's an orange one that's the most common one out there called multiflora, which is orange with spots inside and a bit of yellow down in the throat. They can be quite exotic looking plants, the Bomarias.
Yeah.
I would love to add more to my collection, I have to say.
Now, so climate-wise, talk us through that. So Chile, well, they're not just from Chile, but South America's, they're not extremes in terms of cold, but what's the range? Could you plant these out, say, in southern Britain?
You'd be pushing them, I think. So they're the sort of plant that you'd probably pot grow, put out for the summer, and then bring back into the greenhouse or somewhere sheltered for the winter. In some very, very warm parts of southern Britain, perhaps right down in Cornwall somewhere, perhaps in parts of Ireland, you'd grow them. You'd certainly grow them around the Mediterranean. I mean, south of France, places like that, you'd probably grow Bomarias very well. And they'd certainly grow quite well in California. Some of the slightly more evergreen ones might actually grow in the more tropical areas like Florida. So they're a wonderful group of plants. Most are summer flowering, but as I said, some are completely herbaceous and so flower in the late spring. Others are more or less evergreen, but they all lose the stem that flowers once it finishes flowering. So that stem will die down. It never branches or produces new flower heads. Does it once, disappears.
Other thing is, I've also had the new shoots eaten completely off by slugs and snails, and my heart broke because I thought it's never gonna, like
Oh dear.
Lapageria. So once the shoot's gone, that's it. But it actually reshot.
Oh yes, they will reshoot again. But of course, if the slugs and snails kept at it long enough and persistently enough, then if you don't weaken the plant, you'll kill it. So you do need to keep them away from the new shoots as they're coming up through the ground.
But what a great group of plants. And just, I guess, yours is growing through a hedge.
Yeah.
So it's tuberous rather than bulby. And you've got the tubers sort of in the roots of the hedge. So they're quite dry. They'll get winter rain, but much drier than, say, other parts of the garden.
And it's a bit like some of the other herbaceous perennial climbers like the tropiolums and things that all come from South America. They, if they're summer dormant, they need to be kept dryish in summer.
There you go.
But if they're evergreen, well, that's a different kettle of fish.
Well, what a fabulous sight. And am I right in saying this is one of the best years? Because I've been to your garden often. I don't think I've ever seen so many flowers.
Yeah, well, it's got probably 8 or 10 flowers on it in different spots through the hedge this year.
Yeah.
And yes, I think it is its best year so far. And I don't see them as a plant that you have as in isolation. It's always a plant that I use through something else. So it's an added bonus in the garden, not a, well, they're standout flowers, but the plant itself is not standout. And so therefore they need to be in coordination with other things.
There you go. Now, Stephen, once again stopped in my tracks in your garden because I've been here so often, but every time I look, I see something different. And can I pick a bit of this just to show the good viewers? I've just noticed at floor level this extraordinarily pretty little white flower on I'm going to say a creeper, but well, tell me what it is.
All right. Well, Luzuriaga is a small genus of 4 species. This one is radicans.
Yeah.
And
which means
creepy.
Creepy and can root.
Yes, exactly. So there you go. Well done, Matthew.
Latin one.
Now, there's only 4 species in the genus. 2 come from South America, 1 comes from New Zealand, and 1 comes from the Falkland Islands.
Goodness.
So they're a strange little genus of plants.
Yes.
And they're all this sort of creepy sort of form to them.
Yeah.
In the wild in Chile, I haven't seen the New Zealand one in the wild, and I've certainly not been to the Falklands, unfortunately. But the Chilean ones often grow in the moss up the sides of trees in damp forest conditions. So that is often its habitat. And in fact, I saw the other species, not radicans, but the other Chilean species growing there, not in flower, but in fruit. And it had big orange berries, or actually they weren't quite orange. They were almost a buffy coloured berry. And it had quite long stems that arched over and the berries were hanging under the stem. And I saw it from a distance growing up through the moss on the side of a tree. Had no idea what it was, but I went rushing over to it to have a proper look at it. And I thought, I know what you are, you're a Luzuriaga. But it was one I hadn't actually come across before.
Wow, it's absolutely beautiful. Now, I guess, should we talk negatives, but the fact is that the flowers do hang down and it grows quite close to the ground. So it's not like an obvious flower, but when you look at it, it's stunning.
Yep.
I have one, which I got from you. The reason it surprised me is I've never seen it in flower, but I recognize the leaf. Now mine took a turn in some dry, hot, windy weather, because mine's in a hanging basket. Would you recommend basket growing, or yours is planted underneath a buddleia? What would you recommend?
All right, well, in cooler climates like where I am, it's happy in the ground, although I do find when I get a really dry summer, I often get a bit of burnt foliage through it and what have you.
Yeah.
But it seems to manage and survive quite well. If you could emulate the wild conditions, it would be fabulous.
A moist chili?
Yeah, a moist chili with a lovely mossy tree trunk, because it does look stunning once it gets up to eye level and above. So probably our best alternative is a hanging basket. You could grow it on a piece of tree fern log like a Bomarea rhododendron, and many other epiphytes will grow quite well, and then just hang that up in the fernery or shade house, because if you can lift it up above eye level, the flowers are really, really pretty.
And they're quite large too. I mean, it's very, very striking. And once again, we say this often, but Ireland, Rachel, gardening, Rachel, you need to get yourself some of these to grow.
If you haven't already.
Yeah, it would be stunning in your garden.
Yeah.
Well, what a wonderful thing to find in bloom in a little moment of your garden.
Yeah, well, exactly. There you go.
Stephen, giants.
Yes, there are some amazing plants in the world, and I have to say the giant fennels, and I'm thinking this one is Ferula communis, which is just commonly known as the giant fennel, although there's several giant species of Ferula, and I don't think I've seen a colony as big as this even in the wild, because in the wild they tend to grow in quite stony, dry areas, and you tend to have one isolated plant over there and then you have another isolated plant over there. They don't tend to grow in this sort of concentrated mass, and with these tall flower spikes on it and its fabulous fluffy foliage, it really is a telling plant.
It's absolutely extraordinary. Now just give everyone the context of the life cycle of these.
All right, well, they're winter growing, so they come up when the rains come in the winter. They grow through the winter months as foliage. Come early spring, they'll then send up their flower spikes, which can be 3 meters or more tall.
Massive.
Flower in the late spring, and as soon as the real heat of summer comes on, they will then just disappear underground. I mean, the dead flower spikes will stand there unless you take them down, and I think they're actually quite structurally interesting, so I tend to leave mine. But the whole plant will disappear and all of the foliage will go. It goes yellow before it dies down, and then the plant will go into its dormancy for the rest of the summer and wait until, in fact, it starts to rain again in the late autumn.
There you go. It is beautiful. To try and give you a bit of context of the height, here's me, here's the spike.
Yes.
So it's 8 feet.
Yes, 8 or 9 feet easily.
Massive.
Yeah,
massive.
so they are quite amazingly big plants. Keep in mind though, it is not the commercial edible fennel. So don't plant it with the idea that you're going to use it with the next fish you cook. It doesn't have the right flavour for that, and I'm not altogether sure it's even vaguely edible.
There you go.
But as an ornamental, fabulous plant in the garden.
And we just stumbled across this grove of it. It's the only place in the garden it is, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, it is. It's fabulous.
This is the magic of this garden. You turn corners and there's something incredible.
All right, well, let's turn another corner.
Turn that corner. Off you go.
All right.
Well, Stephen, what a romp through fabulous mid-spring flowers.
Exactly, and we've seen some things today that I hadn't realised were even in the country, so it was a great deal of fun.
Really?
Yeah, so there you go. So I have to put a lot of effort into then suddenly remembering what the names are, but anyhow.
Well done, Mr. Ryan.
And yes, and I mean, it's a very mixed bag. And in fact, speaking of mixed bags, look what's behind us here. This is a stunning specimen of one of the Syringas or lilacs. This is Syringa wolfii, the pink lilac. And it didn't feature in our lilac epic that we did a while back.
So we did a whole film about species lilacs and just how beautiful and restrained they are. And this one is not restrained, it's massive, but the flowers are quite subtle. But
yeah, beautiful.
Beautiful, heady fragrance.
Yeah, it's a lovely plant. So we'll link the lilac story below so you can go and see the other ones.
And where's this from?
This is one of the Asian ones, so China, round about that part of the world. As you can see, it grows into a large shrub, has quite large leaves, and it's a vigorous thing. And we've hit it more or less right at high flowering, which is absolutely fabulous.
And deciduous?
Yes.
Yeah. And no autumn colour like None of them really.
Some of them have a little bit, but yeah, nothing to get too excited by. But it's certainly lovely to see it in a garden in full bloom as we speak, and without the restraints of having to stay small.
Yes, this is the thing about Ruth and Barry's garden, that things just have the space to do what they want to do.
Exactly.
It's wonderful to see things in that context. Well, thank you, Ruth and Barry. As we said, this garden is sometimes open to the public through open garden schemes, etc. So we'll put the link to the Open Gardens program below, and you'll just have to keep checking to see if it ever pops up. The name of the garden is
Rosebery Hill.
Rosebery Hill. So look for that in the Open Garden Scheme website.
So if you want to know what we're doing next week, I would suggest, if you haven't already done it, press subscribe and the alert button so that you can keep up to date with our adventures.
Absolutely. And remember, if you've got a question for our homegrown horticulturalist, Mr. Stephen Ryan, put it in the comments below and say where you're from, and he will answer it in our Monday Shorts in 60 seconds.
I'll do my very best.
But until then, from the heady fragrance of this lilac on a gorgeous spring day, we look forward to seeing you next week.
Bye all.